Hi everyone, I hope you're all well and welcome to episode 99 of the James Layton Fitness Podcast. So in this specific episode we'll be discussing adherence versus the most optimal plan for you, and I want to really put this into context. So in short, adherence really is the most important factor within any fat loss or muscle building phase. If you cannot adhere to and stick to the plan over the long term, you're not going to achieve your goals, regardless of whether you have the most optimal plan for you or not. Adherence really is the key, and within this podcast I want to discuss how if you have even a slightly suboptimal plan but you enjoy it and you can therefore work harder at it and therefore stick with it over the long term, you'll actually achieve better results than someone who has a more optimal plan but who cannot stick with the plan over a longer period of time. They're much more inconsistent with the plan. So there's going to be an example I'll show you in this podcast where this is very, very relevant to a lot of people, especially for those who have goals of building muscle. So a real key take I want you to take away from the podcast is just appreciating that you really want to try and still have some of your personal preferences implemented within the plan. Even though we're still striving for the most optimal plan for you, and I do suggest trying to implement some of the things I've spoken about on previous podcasts and videos in terms of training, nutrition, trying to make things as optimal as possible. At the same time, you still have to enjoy what you're doing. You still have to be able to adhere to it over the longer term. So one example would be, even if a 6-day per week routine may be the most optimal plan for you, if you cannot stick with that over the long term, you can only train 4 days a week, there's no point even attempting to implement a 6-day per week routine. You're not going to stick with it over the long term, whereas implementing a 4-day per week routine, because you have that time available to you, you'll be able to stick with that over the long term and as such get better results than being inconsistent with a 6-day per week routine. Another great example is, as I've spoken about many times before, training body parts at least twice per week if you have goals of building muscle is much more optimal for hypertrophy, because it's easier to accumulate more volume within the week. Because as I've spoken about before, volume is the biggest determining factor for influencing muscle growth. So volume is sets times reps times load. Additionally, if we're training body parts at least twice per week, we're stimulating muscle protein synthesis more frequently as well. However, despite this, there's a lot of individuals that just prefer training body parts once per week. If you go into any gym, the typical male will be hitting body parts once per week. They'll train chest on Monday, back on Tuesday, Wednesday shoulders, arms Thursday, legs Friday, or some similar variation to that. And even though it would be more optimal having splitting their routines, they're training everything twice per week, people like training like this. People really enjoy training like this, and the reality is you can still get good results doing this as long as volume's going up, as long as your strength's going up over time, as long as you have an energy surplus, sufficient protein in place, you will build muscle. So that's a key example. These individuals may prefer training body parts once per week as opposed to twice, and because of this they can work harder at it, they enjoy their training more, they therefore stick with the plan over a longer period of time, and as such they get better results than being inconsistent with training body parts twice per week. So hopefully that makes sense. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be striving for the most optimal plan. We should actually be doing this in both our nutrition and training, but taking into account some of your personal preferences, potentially the time frame, how many days per week you can train, the limit of your actual training sessions in terms of session length, how much time you have available for each session. Taking all this into account will allow you to put together a plan that is actually suitable for you, that you can enjoy and stick to over the longer term, and as such you will get better results by implementing this concept of adherence as opposed to being inconsistent with a more optimal plan. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully you can start implementing some of those strategies. Potentially it might mean you moving away from something slightly more optimal and implementing some of your own personal preference. That's a good example of people enjoying training once per week more than twice per week. If you try both and you just absolutely love training body parts once per week and you detest training body parts twice per week, then stick with that. Make sure you're still focusing on strength gains, volume gains. eating enough to grow, having sufficient protein, you'll still get results. So hopefully that's been useful. If you're still yet to download my free ebook, How to Set Up a Nutrition Plan, if you go to James Layton, Layton fitness.co.uk, you'll see a tab at the top of the page and you can download that immediately. I look forward to speaking to you next week. Thank you very much.